welcome to my latest Policing TV interview. I'm Ben Toomey, your host, and I'm delighted today to have two people that not only are brilliant experts in their field, but also I've had the pleasure of working with in the past. We've got Meg Jones, who is a director at Cranston, which is a social justice and harm reduction charity, and we have Jane Bailey, who is a former senior police officer at West Midlands Police. We had the joy of working together back when I worked for the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner alongside Meg, and Jane was the silver lead for drug policy at the time. So we did a lot of things together, which we're going to talk about in this interview, in fact. So trying to break the ice with people that I know very well. Jane, you've recently retired. How are you settling into the retirement life, at least before you consider going into new work?
Oh, thanks, Ben. I'm really enjoying just taking some time out after a 33-year career in policing. So life is good, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And Meg, you're just settling back into work after recently having had a baby. So how's that treating you?
Yeah, no, it's been a very busy year and a fantastic year, and nice to be picking back up some of this work again. So nice to come back and have this conversation with you both as well.
Fantastic. Well, pleasure to have you here. So we're thinking today about some of the issues around how policing is changing and the way that we work with people who would otherwise end up in the criminal justice system by different means. So thinking about diversion and the way that that works, Meg, this is a big part of Cranston's work across the country, isn't it? So can you tell us a little bit about what diversion is?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes the terminology can be different in different places. We do a lot of work actually with colleagues in the US who now call diversion deflection, taking it that one step earlier into the community, which I think is a really important distinction between the two, deflection and diversion. But essentially it's how we can support people away from the criminal justice system, how we can look at what is causing that person's criminality and how we can treat that in a different way. So this week actually it's come to light even more so with the sentencing review that's currently underway with David Gork, looking at the issue of prison places in the UK, and I think diversion, really good quality diversion, which really does divert people away from prison, has to be a factor and has to be better invested in this country.
Fantastic. And what does that look like in practice? How do you divert someone away from prison? It's not just saying, run along now and carry on with your day, is it? There's more to it than that.
No, and it depends on the level of intervention that you can bring in. So if we take the West Midlands as an example, we deliver the Divert programme, which is essentially for any drug possession. That person, instead of going through the kind of normal criminal justice system, is diverted to us at Cranston, and they get a one-to-one telephone assessment, and then they also get, if it's deemed suitable, which most people do, come on to our kind of education and harm reduction session around drugs. But also at the other end, it can be a more intensive model of diversion. So again, in the West Midlands, we have the Cranston Arrest Referral Service, which is in every police custody block, and that's about engaging with people who are using drugs and alcohol in a more problematic way that intersects basically with the criminal justice system. And if we can step in at that point, if we can inform the pre-sentence reports that go to the court process, then actually we've got a real opportunity to support people for what is driving that criminality rather than just responding to the criminality itself.
And we'll pick up on that issue about problematic drug use a bit later on in this interview. But Jane, just turning to you, this is in some ways a change in the role of policing, because I know the Divert programme comes through policing roots, doesn't it, really? It comes through the police and the Police and Crime Commissioner. Do you think that this is an entirely new phenomenon, diversion, or is it something that's happened over the last 33 years of your career, and is it, we're only just talking about it in these terms now?
So I think diversion has long been of interest and been pursued through policing. Trying to divert people from entering the criminal justice system in the first place has been absolutely paramount, but it also links very closely to local policing and the strategy about problem solving, prevention and intervention. So with policing trying to get far more upstream of the causes of issues and trying to work with the relevant partner agencies that can help and assist and support to actually prevent people entering into that situation or position in the first instance. So the prevention and intervention of sort of elongated substance misuse is absolutely in the interest of communities, so policing would want to be part of that journey. And it's been incredibly helpful to have some innovative third sector partners to work with who are interested in doing and being bold in that space, and taking innovation to the people who can make a difference. Because one of the key factors, I think, in policing as well is ensuring that your Chief Constable and your Police and Crime Commissioner have synergy of thought around that innovation, and that they're willing to push and test some of those boundaries, as we did in West Midlands, and you'll remember from when we all worked together through this. But absolutely, policing is absolutely engaged and involved in prevention and intervention.
And that's a good point you make about the third sector being involved. Meg, I wonder if you have a view on why is the third sector the right place to look for these sort of interventions? Can't the police do this themselves if it's reducing crime?
I think Jane kind of hit the nail on the head, really, which is, policing is a really important component of a whole community approach, and that community approach has to involve, a broad group of expertise, and policing can't do this on their own, but also probably shouldn't be doing some of these things because it's not an expertise that we're expecting police to have. The same with some of our work around domestic abuse perpetrator programmes. It's really important that we harness the best skills and expertise from a range of partner organisations, because ultimately, and we have people within the custody block that we will go and speak to them in the cells, and they will speak to our staff because we are not the police, and that's a really important distinction, because they can talk a bit more openly sometimes about their drug or alcohol use to someone who is a third party rather than a police officer. But it's a really important partnership that we need to get right across the whole country. I think there's pockets of good practice, but it's very inconsistent across the country as well.
And just to get into the mindset of police officers, Jane, if we're thinking about the traditional criminal justice route of police officers can make arrests, it's one of the key powers available. You make an arrest and then you'd hope that that arrest moves into a prosecution and then into a conviction, would have been the traditional route. Do you think police officers are aware that now, when they make an arrest, or if it gets that far, that there are other routes available, and that they would understand and support the idea that those that they may have even taken to jail are ending up going down a diverted or deflected course instead?
Absolutely. I do think there's, we're always recruiting from communities, and there are changing views around drugs and drug use or misuse amongst communities, and we see that as well in police officers doing their daily duties. So they are very much aware of the Divert programme, for example, in West Midlands, which chooses to offer those in possession, personal possession of controlled drugs, the opportunity for a diversion. And the other aspect of that as well is, if you look at how the majority of those personal possession type offences are discovered during what we would call dynamic police activity. So, maybe an operation targeted towards intelligence led within an area where perhaps there's a bit more violence, or there's more serious acquisitive crime, because we know that drug use or misuse is associated with that type of criminality, or it can be a driver for violence. So the activities there tend to be more targeted and more dynamic, and actually what we have found from the Divert programme is that actually one of our larger cohorts of people that we do stop are those between the ages of 14 and 24. So those younger people that we would want to, if we can, lawfully offer the opportunity to understand about drugs and any safe usage, should that be a route they want to choose to take, or equally the consequences of that in their young life and what that might mean for them in the future. And it also means using the Divert programme that we're able to prevent them from being suspended from school or college or accessing employment opportunities because it's not considered to be a criminal record, albeit there would be a record of that for vetting purposes. However, and it also, the important part there is some of those young people no doubt would be involved in some gang activity or on the fringes of, and potentially being exploited or groomed for, you know, gang initiation. And so it's an opportunity for our partners to work through supporting these young people and individuals to make sure that we can offer them appropriate safeguards and recognise some of the issues that are going on with those not outside of that drug taking, drug carrying, drug use. So that would be you know, sort of foremost in the officers' minds, and they are very much aware of the Divert programme and its successes. And I think certainly before I left, we were just on the last year of a trial with Cambridge University, who were reviewing the outcomes and the impact. And I think the early successes that we had seen was there'd been a significant reduction in reoffending, which is excellent amongst that age group. But of course those results would need to be verified and validated at a later date when it's complete.
Great. Well, look forward to reading those when they are. Thank you, Jane. Just thinking, Meg, about that reoffending point that Jane has made. If it works, and you know, the evidence I think suggests that it does work to divert people away from criminal justice routes, traditional ones, and then that will work to reduce reoffending. But some people will still reoffend. What happens then? Is there another chance to go down a route like this, or do we then throw the book in the traditional sense at these people?
Yeah. So I think. And fundamentally as well, a lot of the starting point around this as well is that many people who use drugs never come into contact with the criminal justice system. And so, you know, we're talking about a relatively small cohort of people who do come into contact with the criminal justice system. The really good thing about Divert is that if people engage with that process, then they can be offered it again. And so therefore engaging with education, harm reduction, and information about drugs is rewarded in terms of being offered that opportunity again and not going down a kind of sanctioned criminal justice route. Obviously it's then up to, and we do have to deliver it differently in different police force areas depending on the kind of request of that force. But our kind of main rationale would be that it should be offered more than once, and that we should incentivise people to attend that session as well. And ultimately what we tend to find is that for young people, that kind of drugs education session is really appreciated actually, because we seem to have missed that somewhere in kind of regular education. And we're not telling young people don't do drugs are bad, don't do drugs, because that doesn't work, obviously. If it did work, then people wouldn't be taking drugs since the Misuse of Drugs Act in the early 70s. So that doesn't work, and instead what we do is give young people the information to allow them to make informed decisions, and I think that's really, really important. But also the other thread that comes out in that is the relationship between people who use drugs and the police. And we'll probably come on to this as well in the naloxone discussion as well. But that's a really important thing sometimes to tease out of that education session is, you know, there are people that would say to us as an organisation, why are you working with the police? You know, it's not good for people who use drugs because we have been harmed by the police previously. And that's because of the law that was put in place under the Misuse of Drugs Act, which obviously penalises and criminalises people who use drugs. However, this is something that we can get on and do now, and that the police are supportive of, that we have seen increases trust and confidence between police officers and people who use drugs, and actually has been a real positive for that relationship in communities. Certainly from our feedback, and I'm not sure if that's been the same with police officers on the ground, but for young people who have previously had a set idea about police and police officers, actually that's been a really good opportunity to have those conversations and recognise that the law itself is an issue in this case, but actually there's things that we can get on and do now to reduce that harm that the law basically promotes from that.
And that moves us seamlessly on, thank you Meg, to the naloxone point that we're probably going to end on as the final topic. Just thinking about our experience, I suppose, as the three of us in helping to make West Midlands Police the first police force in the country where police officers actually carry naloxone. For those that don't know, that's the antidote to heroin, so it can be used to block or reverse an overdose when it's happening. And police officers are still carrying to this day in the West Midlands naloxone. Jane, you were at the forefront of delivering this for West Midlands Police. Can you tell us what were the arguments that were important to basically saying to the police and pushing this through that that it does need to be a priority for the police, even though it feels or felt at the time to many that it was actually a broadening of the role of the police?
So I think you have to start with, as a public body, being bound by the Human Rights Act. And actually, Article 2 under the European Court of Human Rights is that right to life. And I think we had experienced, certainly in the city centre, some open space drug taking and drug misuse that was causing antisocial behaviour, sort of with the spike in synthetic cannabinoid use that was taking place in public spaces at the time. So we were seeing and experiencing lots of calls for service and issues with regards to antisocial behaviour drug taking in those open spaces, and that was causing some real concern for some of the organisations and city centre stores that have premises there, and were often finding people who were really poorly or needed acute medical assistance. And the same could have been said of our officers who were dynamically out on patrol, on foot patrol in the city centre, and would need to provide first aid to somebody and call the ambulance service to assist and support them. So that was a sort of starting point around this, and starting to look at, okay, well, what are our options here? What can we do to assist and support this issue? And it was at that point that we started looking at the sort of wider issues. And if we look around 2017 to David James, the then PCC, had brought together a call for evidence around drug misuse and any recommendations from a wide-ranging set of partners and those with lived experience and community members. And one of the recommendations there was about increasing the uptake of naloxone amongst first responders. So having worked through the drug policy, had the discussion with the Chief Officer Group around those various recommendations, of which they all supported and signed up to, it seemed to me and it seemed to us that that was one of the first things that we could relatively quickly introduce to ease the situation. And I think we also have to think at that time there was a rising drug-related deaths in Birmingham per se, and those continued over a 3-year period. And in the top 2 categories, heroin-related death, always featured. So that was something else that we wanted to do to target, working with our partners and try and reduce the opportunity and try and mitigate some of those risks. And we were seeing also, with the introduction of the early drug alert, we were also seeing that information passed very quickly, where there seemed to be a batch of heroin circulating or other drugs circulating that had something in it that was causing adverse medical reaction by a number of people. And we had a series of those events, of which you'll remember, Ben and Meg, from some of the discussions that we've had with partners, and we had to work together very quickly to make sure that that information got out to users to keep them safe. So as I sort of made the point earlier, we thought this was going to be relatively easily introduced. That was wrong, actually. When you introduce new things into policing, it takes time. And actually, it was a new concept for a lot of our strategic partners. And so there were some hurdles that we hadn't anticipated that we had to overcome, and there were some things that we thought might be more challenging that were a little bit easier. And so together we worked through that, and we created a steering group of our strategic partners and made sure that everybody had all of the relevant information. And not only the sort of strategic statutory bodies, but our third sector partners as well. And anybody from a stakeholder perspective that had a view, so lived experience. We also included the IOPC for contact as well through our professional standards department to ensure that where possible we had reduced and mitigated any risks for policing. And we also needed to look at the logistics and the legalities of that, which of course the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner were interested in. And I guess on top of that, we're fortunate to have a National Police Chiefs Council with a nominated Chief Constable and Deputy Chief Constable at the time that were leads for drugs nationally at policing. So they were important advocates to involve and engage in the process that we undertook in West Midlands. And I think some of the concerns from the National Policing Federation at the time were that this was an added demand on policing with finite resource. It wasn't something they felt policing should be offering or doing. And I think the real persuasive the persuasive argument for our Chief Constable at the time was the Article 2 consideration, right to life. And because our officers were routinely coming across people who needed first aid and sometimes fast aid because of something that they'd taken, then our officers were already in that position whereby they could buy that extra time by administering the naloxone, which would buy an extra bit of time for the paramedics and ambulance service to arrive and be able to preserve life and offer, a greater degree of support than our officers who are only routinely first aid trained and routinely trained to deliver naloxone. But the real game changer there. Sorry, Beth.
Sorry. I think it's absolutely right that you've pointed to the right to life not being an abstract right. It's something that there's a duty to deliver as a public body, but a duty to protect life, and that ability to fulfil that duty comes in front of officers several times a week, and so actually making that practical was really important. I'll just move to Meg quickly because we're running short on time. Sorry, Jane. But just thinking about the role then of the Police Commissioner, because we both worked for the Police and Crime Commissioner within this. There was obviously a lot of partners doing a lot of good work to try and make the stars align, so that West Midlands could be out there as the first, set that precedent that police officers could carry naloxone for all those reasons that Jane mentioned. But why do you think the Police and Crime Commissioner's office was an important starting point for some of those discussions?
Yeah, that's a really good question actually, and I think something that I've been thinking about since in terms of how to impact real change, because one of the things that I think we're all aware of that we haven't seen yet in England and Wales are things like overdose prevention centres, and continuing that push right now. But I think one of the really important things and the reason why the naloxone diversion and lots of the other work that we did together was such a success, I think, was because we had a PCC that was willing to put his head above a parapet on an issue which is sometimes quite politically difficult, and I think that's really important to set out. And then I think there were individuals involved from both policing context with Jane and from us in the OPCC, as well as key people in partner organisations who got it and who also had the drive, I think, collectively to deliver something and get on with it. And that's quite a unique thing. And you say the phrase, the stars align, Ben, which it really did feel like you just had the right people in the right places at the right time to just get that over the line. Because I think without that, and as Jane kind of touched on, there was a lot to make sure that everything, all the I's were dotted, all the T's were crossed. We had to really have those discussions with a number of both national and local bodies to make sure that everyone was comfortable with that position. And to the extent that I think that work was done particularly well, which meant that actually other police forces followed, to the point that now I think nearly all forces, I think it's close to at least 40, have officers carrying naloxone, which is this is the difference between saving lives and not. So the importance of that is huge, but it definitely, I think, comes down to, unfortunately, having key individuals in the right place as well, and I think we just happened to kind of nail that at the time.
Yeah, and that's a good note to end on, because just thinking about who's watching this, you could be a key individual, you could be working as a police officer or in a police commissioner's office, or maybe you're even a member of the public who's interested in this area, but that conversation doesn't just start with an instruction from central government. Far from it. We didn't have anything like that, and so it's about individuals taking forward the evidence base, raising the issue, and then finding solutions to it. And that might sound very bureaucratic. Really, actually, it comes down to the fact that it does save lives in the end. So for me, I don't know about you, Meg and Jane, probably similar, but for me, it's one of my proudest achievements is being involved in that policy and the fact that it's still saving lives today, not just in the West Midlands but in the other areas where it's been taken on because of the spearheading work that you two did alongside others as well. So thank you so much. Really good to reminisce on some of that, and hopefully some of the discussion here has been of use to people who are watching. But we've covered diversion, the role of the third sector, naloxone. If anyone watching this has any views on any of those things, then please do comment and share this interview as well. We'd love to hear from you. But thanks so much in the meantime from my old friends and colleagues Meg and Jane. Best of luck with your work as well as you go forward. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ben.